Hello and welcome to our first webinar of 2024. I was recently told that New Year wishes are not valid after January 10th, but I don't care. So here's wishing all of you a very happy New Year. I hope you all had a wonderful time ushering in the New Year with your loved ones. Thank you so much for joining in for this webinar. I am Atul Priya Sharma, your host for the session. I work as a senior developer advocate at InfraCloud, and I'm also a CNCF ambassador. I'm involved in a lot of activities surrounding DevOps, Kubernetes, cloud native, and open source at large. And outside of work, I love to explore places and try new cuisines. So do let me know in the comments where are you from and what do you do. So you can just drop in the comments and I'll go through them as and when we go through. And as you might have guessed, I'm not here alone today. And as host, I have got some superpowers where I can show and hide people on the live stream. So let me just bring along the speakers and the guests for today. I have Bruno with me, and I also have Vishal here. Both Bruno and Vishal are stalwarts in their own field, and I think it's best that I let them introduce themselves. So, Bruno, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience?
Oh, thank you, Atul, and thanks for inviting me to do this talk. It's really nice to talk about testing, any opportunity that I have. So, as you know, my name is Bruno. I'm from Portugal. I'm the product lead of Testkube, a really nice testing framework that we're gonna talk about today. And I've been working with testing companies for the last almost 3 years. It's been really interesting, this journey, seeing what are the challenges of testing in the in tech companies that are adopting cloud technologies. And yeah, like looking forward to talking about testing.
Thank you so much, Bruno. Vishal, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Vishal Biani, founder and CTO at InfraCloud Technologies. I am a developer turned into DevOps over time in the days of Puppet, Chef, Ansible, Salt, and stuff. I've been working on Kubernetes and open source since the early days of Kubernetes, and my focus largely has been helping enterprises adopt open source technologies and tools effectively. Contributed to a few projects in the middle of the journey, but yeah, by and large focused on enterprise transformations around cloud native technologies today.
Great. Thank you so much, Bruno and Vishal, for giving time off and joining this webinar. I'm sure there's a lot of learning involved, not only for the audience but for myself as well. So before we get started, a few housekeeping stuff that I would like to mention to all of you. We will be taking questions. So if you have any questions, queries, or even suggestions or point of views, please put them down in the comments below, and we will take them up and have the experts answer them. Lastly, pardon me for any strange noises that come from my end. It's just the traffic here. So, with that out of the way, we can get started with the session today. So, over the years, as the industry, we have focused always on delivering quality software and new features faster to our customers. And what happened in that quest was we always focused more on shifting left. And that meant that our developers were now being loaded with a lot of responsibility. So back in the day, the developer probably was required only to, let's say, write logic for his application, make some loops, make some conditions, decide how the application workflow actually works. But today, a typical developer is also expected to understand the nuances of, let's say, Terraform. They probably have to deal with writing Terraform modules, state files, also dealing with things like Istio, a lot of other service mesh, networking. So you see, there has been a lot of cognitive load that has been added to our developers in the whole ideology of shifting left. So to counter that, enterprises across the globe, they decided to start build something called as platforms, which is what we would be discussing today very briefly. And these platforms are basically enriched with capabilities that the developers need to improve their experience, to improve their productivity, and in turn ship features faster, along with high quality, features that are supposed to be there. So, for instance, when a new developer joins the team, traditionally what used to happen, probably you would have a senior developer handhold the junior developer, and help him set up the environment, set up everything related to the libraries, dependencies for the developer to get onboarded and start working. With platforms, what companies are doing is they are creating something called as templates or golden paths, as it is popularly known. And what these paths basically do is that it takes the entire journey of a developer onboarding and puts them into a guided tour sort of. So the new developer in this case has to just log into your company's internal developer portal, where he gets everything as a template. He clicks a few buttons, click next, give some configuration details, and the entire system is ready, entire environment is ready for the developer to start working. So that is one way how developers, how platforms actually help new developers onboard faster. But that's typically a day zero scenario. Platforms today have evolved quite much, and they support a lot of day one and day two scenarios as well. So you can read more about platforms in the CNCF platforms white paper as well. The link is shown here. So it's a good way to start your platform engineering journey if you are totally new to platforms, and if you want to know what platforms are, what platform engineering is. This is a good place to start your journey. We at InfraCloud have not only been sharing our learnings about platform engineering. We have been sharing a lot of them through our blog posts, through a lot of other talks that we have done. But we are also actively involved in the CNCF's platform working group as well. And more recently, what we have done is we have published a platform engineering reference architecture ebook. And the whole idea of this ebook is to help engineering teams with platform engineering blueprints that include tool suggestions, maturity questionnaires to help teams get started. What we have seen based on our discussions with customers, based on discussing with the community, is the platform teams usually are sort of in the center of a maze where they don't have much idea of how to start or where to start. And that is where this ebook comes into picture, where we have given pointers, tool suggestions, questionnaires to help teams get started. So this ebook is free for you to download. So you can just scan the QR code here and get your copy. And though the book has a lot of details in it, what I'll do is that for a couple of minutes, I will sneak into two important aspects that we covered in this book. The first one is that we have devised the capabilities of a platform under three tenets. So we say that your platform's capabilities can fall into three buckets. You have a develop, you have consume, and you have discover. So all the capabilities that are directly used to build the service itself will fall under the develop category. So usually, the environments that are required, let's say someone's working on a React app. So the React ecosystem, the React environment is what it would be as an environment that the developer would be using to develop their application. So anything of that sort fits in the develop bucket. On the consume side, these are the capabilities that are essentially external components that are used by services. And these include things like databases, message queues, and anything that aids the core application that is being built. And lastly, under discover, these are basically ancillary systems that are not directly used to create an application or a service, or not even consumed in a way, but they are useful to analyze or monitor the application's behavior. So this is one of the things that is there in the ebook. Second thing, which is what we would be discussing today as well, is the platform engineering capability map. So every platform should have certain set of capabilities like we discussed earlier. And in this ebook, we have shortlisted, or we have provided a capability map with 8 capabilities that your platform should have. So it should have a service template, a workload specification, inner development loop, pipelines, environments, testing infrastructure, progressive delivery, and ephemeral environments. So essentially, what we are trying to say is that if you have a platform which has each of these capabilities, then your platform is good enough to cater to the needs of your developers. And also, it is a wholesome platform that is there for anyone in your team to access. So it is something that will be robust, that will be long term, and that will be efficient, and it'll be providing a better developer experience to your developers as well. So as part of the webinar that you are joining in today, we would be discussing about testing infrastructure. And over the course of the next few months, we would be bringing in more webinars where we highlight each aspect of the capability map that we have shown here, along with a tool for each of these capabilities. So in today's webinar, as I said, we would be touching upon the testing infrastructure. For someone like me who started my career as a manual tester, testing web portals and mobile applications at one time, I understand the value of testing. And I'm sure Bruno, Vishal, and all of you who are there in the webinar today also understand how valuable testing is. But for a second, let's just go beyond the mechanics of testing tools. For a lot of us, testing still means that go out there, pick up the most shiniest tool that you have in the market, just put it in your system, and that will do everything for you. But then that's not actually the case. At a very high level, it's about combining the tools, it's about combining the best practices to develop a culture of quality at the core. And that is what our whole discussion point will be today. We will be focusing on the quality aspects of building a platform and how to foster a culture that keeps the quality focused platforms in place. So as we start the exploration, as we start this webinar, I would like to start with a topic which is called Testops. For a lot of you, it feels like it's just a word in a book or in the technology landscape, but it's more than just a word. It's a symbiotic relationship. It's a marriage. It's a collaboration between DevOps and testing. And I think the best person over here to tell us about Testops is Bruno. So Bruno, why don't you share some light around Testops with our audience?
Thank you, Atul. So Testops it's like the all the keywords that appear on the cloud technologies is also a trend in testing. I think at the beginning of this webinar you mentioned shift left, right? So we want to have testing and to know about things that might impact our pipelines as early as possible, right? So if there's an issue that is going to appear, we don't want to wait until everything is done, only to have an error at the end. We want to have it sooner and faster so that we don't waste time, right? So the term DevOps is very well known, like it's very familiar. Everybody's familiar with that. So it's like as I think I'm going to use the same analogy that you use of marriage between developers and operations, right? So it's kind of not just a role, but a methodology of DevOps, where you join the cycle of development with the operations, with the deployment, with everything, and you make it work very well in a very efficient way. Even though there are people that have DevOps as a role, and companies say, well, we want to hire a DevOps person, I feel that DevOps is more than a role. It's kind of a methodology, something that your team implements. It's not just one person. It's kind of the whole company needs to work like that. So that's, I just want to talk about DevOps to give the context. So when we talk about Testops, what's the difference, right? So the development life cycle has many steps, right? There's the integration, there's the delivery, and there's the development, the building, of course, and there's the testing. So we talk a lot about practices for everything, but testing is not taught a lot, right? Or there's not a lot of emphasis. People don't really have a lot of concerns about testing. It's kind of an afterthought, right? So the term Testops is really to describe those methodologies that are more shift left, are more efficient when it comes to testing. So it's kind of a, let's say, it's part of the DevOps, right? So DevOps is more general and talks about the development. Testops talks more about the testing aspects, and it really need to be more efficient when it comes to testing. You need to be very flexible. Your team really needs to be empowered, because it often happens that people don't really test it just because they don't have the right tooling, they don't have the right processes, and they are like, well, I clicked on a few buttons, seems to work, it's good enough, let's ship it, right? So it can be better than that, and that's why we have Testops.
Great. I think a couple of points, that I would like to pick from what you said was definitely one that that DevOps is not just a role; it's much more than a role. And the whole thought of Testops, or rather testing being an afterthought, is something that we all have probably overcome at a certain level, but a lot of work needs to be done on this front. So in continuation to this, I would like to ask Vishal, what are your thoughts when it comes to talking about test top and how it extends the DevOps principle, unifying, the testing development for a better or a more cohesive approach?
Absolutely. Thanks, Atul. So the way I look at this is, the way DevOps enables people to run, for example, CI pipelines or deploy applications to faster or manage artifacts, right? The same thing has to be thought out about testing perspective. How can I create a test environment, as quickly as I can? Let's say I want something equivalent of production data so that I can do performance test. Can I spin that up fast enough? Can I do my testing, get my results, and tear it down basically, right? So I'd almost think of it in an ephemeral, on-demand platform available for you to do a bunch of things, right? From your functional test to integration test to performance test to anything else that you would want to do as a quality assurance scheme. And then obviously, once you've done all of this, you want the reports, you want the results to be stored somewhere, monitored somewhere, tracked somewhere, right? And that's my view of test ops, very similar to DevOps, I would say.
True. I think you made a very valid point that, to have a testing environment that actually supports you to run tests, to have your, the entire testing pipeline in place, what we are referring to as test ops, and also a dashboard where you can get a lot of results and insights into your testing. Taking a next step from test ops, I think, since you already touched about environments, testing environments are nothing if you don't have testing tools in place. You need a lot of testing tools which are specialized to perform a lot of different use cases. You have tools for functional testing, load testing, UI testing, end-to-end testing, smoke testing. I mean, there are a bunch of testing tools out there. And when you talk about test ops, it's also critical to discuss about testing tools and how do you integrate them to a particular platform. So, zooming in a bit on the Kubernetes side of things, because, that has become the default, orchestrator for most of the applications around. So, zooming in on that, Bruno, what do you think, goes in when we talk about how to bring all these tools together from a Kubernetes perspective?
So that's a really interesting fact, which is the testing tools are not really meant for Kubernetes, right? So that's a challenge that companies today face. We see a lot of tools being created in the last years to solve many problems when it comes to cloud operations. For example, we have service meshes, to handle the communication and the visibility on the networks between the services. We have Grafana dashboards, we have Prometheus for the metrics, we have ingresses to expose the applications. There's a lot of tools that were created to solve problems that Kubernetes itself does not solve, right? Kubernetes is more for the orchestration, and then you need to bring all these different tools together so that you have a really good solution, right? So the same thing is not happening today in the Cloud Native Foundation when it comes to testing, right? If you go to the CNCF landscape, you're not going to see a lot of tools for testing. If you go to KubeCon and you list the types of talks that are there, we have talks on observability, on the delivery. But if you go and see, testing and search for it, there's a few talks, yeah, but it's not the same proportion. There's certainly a gap there, and that is reflected on the evolvement, let's say, or the technology evolved. We saw the transition between big data centers. We thought VMs, right? And then we saw VMs, and then we saw containers, and then containers we saw Kubernetes, right, to orchestrate all of that. So that's an evolution, right, on the cloud. The testing tools did not evolve at the same pace, and I feel that it's because testing usually is an afterthought in a lot of companies, and I feel that the reason is not that companies don't care about that. Is they do is that it's a balance between the investment that they have to put just to have a good process with the returns. More often than not, companies just go and do manual testing because that's quicker for them and cheaper, that actually have a reliable process that will pay dividends in the long term. So there's a myth where you say, well, we're going to save time because we're not going to do a lot of testing here. You can save time on the short term, but on the long term, you're going to lose out.
Yes, I think to sum that thing perfectly, it's correct to say that Testops is not a sprint, but it's a marathon. Testing is a long journey that should be apart from. It should not be afterthought, like Bruno mentioned earlier as well. So it's a long process. It's a continuous process that has to evolve. Unfortunately, testing as a practice or testing tools haven't evolved at the same pace like the other technologies have evolved over the years, like Bruno pointed out. Going through taking a little more nuanced view on this, I would like to ask Vishal, how do you think, or rather, what are the challenges when it comes to getting such testing tools for Kubernetes? It's difficult to bring them to make it native to Kubernetes or take more advantage of what Kubernetes is. So what are your thoughts on that front?
Sure. I would like to split, I think the view of that in two different things. I think Bruno was earlier talking about containers. I think all of the software teams want to use the best language and the best tool for the job. And eventually I think the container gives you that abstraction that whether it is Java or Ruby or Erlang, it doesn't matter. I'm running it in a container, obviously, right? I think we have to also think of the testing tools and infrastructure in that sense, because every team will choose the tool that makes the most sense for them for the use case that they have in hand, right? It could be JUnit, for example, for load unit testing, but it could be completely other tool for performance testing, right? And you want to abstract out the underlying differences and still execute and run in a similar manner, right? So in my opinion, the Testops platform should provide that kind of abstraction where the underlying actual testing technology could be anything that you want to use that's the best for your job. But I should be able to do almost everything seamlessly across these different technologies and not get bogged down by all the details of the underlying platforms, right? And I think in form of Kubernetes CRDs and the controller patterns and those kind of things, they give us an opportunity to build that kind of abstraction where we define what we need to test, and then the underlying technology is kind of abstracted in a container, if I have to call it that ways, and it just runs for whatever microservice or a data service or anything else that you're running under the hood, basically.
Really good. I think Vishal touched a really interesting point there. If you let me add a tool, is that you mentioned that containers really don't care what's the testing tool or the tool that's inside. It's just a container. It just wants to run stuff, right? Does not matter. And it's really interesting. And one of the challenges on the testing tools that I was mentioning is exactly that conversion of the pre-container world to the post-containers, right? Some tools don't make it very easy to transition between the non-containerized world to the containerized world that runs in Kubernetes. And so, for example, that's one of the challenges of the testing tools is that they are not prepared, or they didn't think on how to leverage containers exactly, to run all of that.
Yep, absolutely. For all of you who have just tuned in, we are comparing the pre-dinosaur era, post-dinosaur era with testing. So how things have been in the pre-container era and post-container era, and that's what we are discussing around Testops and test tools integrations. So if you have just joined in, you can drop in your queries, comments in the comments below, and we would take them up at an appropriate time. So we discussed about the testing environments. We also touched upon how the entire ecosystem needs to be seamless. It needs to be integrated well enough so that you have the right amount of abstraction given to your developers as part of the platform, and then you also have the right amount of flexibility as well. And I think that's where it's essential when you talk about a platform. Deciding flexibility versus abstraction. Now, we boiled down from the testing environment. We spoke about testing environments earlier, and then we touched upon Testops. Then we came to testing tool. But I think at the core of any testing tool or any testing principle practice is a test. That's at the heart of every testing practice. So, my next question to Bruno, to you is, what are your thoughts when it comes to managing tests across different environments? Because we see that, there are a lot of environments before an application or a feature goes to production. So, once the QA team has a test in place, how do you think, these tests should be managed in different environments? And, what are some best practices, quick best practices that you can share when it comes to managing tests?
That's a really awesome question. So because it's a really big problem. In the still talking about the trends, we came from a monolithic architecture, talking about many years ago, and transitioning into microservices, right? So that's the common practice today is that companies, as they scale and they become more complex, they transition into microservices. So they stopped having a very big and complex component to having simple components, but having more of them, right? So that changes testing, because now you are not testing one component, but you're testing several and testing many, right? And you have many things in parallel. So not only with the new technologies you end up having more environments, but also in those environments you have many components that are being tested, and then having visibility on that can be extremely difficult, right? So if you want to say this particular component on that specific environment or with this version, I want to know what happened. Is it passing? Is it failing? Imagine that what it would be like to go to a pipeline and trying to figure out in which step when was that service tested, right? And what exactly was the logs or what's the root cause. It can be very taxing. So that's why tools, like Testkube are very handy, because they centralize everything in one place and allows you in a very quick manner to access a particular test that tests a specific microservice or is in a specific environment, and it's very fast just to get that information. So I think that the most important thing about test management, I would say that the first one is observability. The other one is scalability, because we are going to test many components at the same time across different environments. So it should not be blocked by resources. You should be able to scale horizontally. So the one is scaling, and the other one would be when it comes to test management is the easiness to integrate. So it should be easy as you add more components, also to integrate the tests into that development lifecycle and the testing tools as well. So that should not be a big blocker for you. And so I think that those are the most important things to be aware.
Great one, Bruno. So I think there's one learning for me in whatever you said. I've been talking about a lot of environments being there, but then I think you put a very valid point that the applications are becoming complex. You have more microservices, you have more components that are coming in, and that is also a very critical aspect to pay attention to, and not just the environments. And since you spoke about Testkube, why don't we dive into what Testkube is and what it does. So for anyone who is joining in, we would now be discussing about Testkube. It's a testing framework, and Bruno is the right person to talk about it. But I had an opportunity to try it at KubeCon last year. I got a feel of it, and I would say that being a tester in the early days of my career, it did make my life easy in those 15-20 minutes that I tried. But I'll hand it over to Bruno to help us understand what Testkube really is and how it helps us, have the entire philosophy of Testops imbibed in our entire process. So, Bruno, the stage is all yours.
Oh, thank you. So, Testkube is an open source testing orchestration framework, and it really tries to help companies to adopt the Testops methodologies, right? So we saw that there is a lot of issues when it comes to having tests to be cloud native, right? And to basically allow teams to achieve all of these efficient testing processes. And Testkube really tries to solve that. So it's a tool that runs, actually, let me say differently, is a framework that runs testing tools. So Testkube is going to run your testing tool. If you want to test backend, you can use Postman. If you want to test front end, you can use Cypress or Playwright. You can use those tools for end-to-end tests as well. You can use, for example, for performance tests, you can use K6. There's artillery. There's so many testing tools, right? And all companies have different testing tools that they want to integrate, that they want to implement. So Testkube takes those tools and runs it for you in the cloud. So I didn't add slides here because I'm trying to follow a trend, which is I don't want to show slides. I want to show the product, and then the product should speak for itself. So I think that's the best way for me to convey the message of Testkube is really to show it to you. And as I'm showing, I'm just going to explain it and so you see what it does. So I think that's maybe the engineer in me. I just want to see what is the stuff, and then I'll take the conclusions for myself, right? Of if it's helpful or not. So I think we can just jump straight into it. So starting with the first pillar that I mentioned, talking about test observability and having observability just on your tests, if they are passing and if they are failing, exactly where is it failing, what's the issues. Just you should not be blind to those testing workflows and what's happening here. So here I deployed Testkube to a cluster. So Testkube lives and runs in a Kubernetes cluster and takes advantage of all the Kubernetes capabilities. So it's Kubernetes-native. And here you can see basically it's just a dashboard that is exposed there. And you see all of the tests here. So these are already a demo environment that I have up. In case any of the viewers wants to come here and tries to crash it, please feel free. Just wait a few minutes after I'm done with the demo, if you don't mind. But you can play around with it here. And so let me create a test, and then you see exactly how it works. So here you can do it the manual way. You can integrate with pipelines. And any type of CI/CD. That's actually the recommended way, is that people integrate this to their pipelines and make it part of their workflow. So every time they deploy to a test environment, they basically run a Testkube test or test suite, and they just run a workflow, and then they can roll back if something fails. They can just understand what's happening, or even without a CI/CD, they can just use this for monitoring and testing the environments that are running for a long time and just understanding if they are running well. So here, let's say I'm going to create my K6 infra cloud test, for example. So here, K6, by the way, is a load testing framework. So it's going to test the load against an endpoint, let's say a microservice. And here in Testkube, you can define the test. So there's something called executors in Testkube, which is basically a Docker image that does the testing tool that you want to run, and then you just select it here, with the more powerful additions that we added. So here I'm just going to select K6, right? So you can select a lot of testing tools out of the box. In case you don't, you want to use a testing tool that is custom or something, let's say proprietary, or is not supported out of the box with Testkube, you can still run it here, because you can just define a new executor. We are fully open source. It's very easy to just define it in the product, and as long as it can run in a container, Testkube does not matter. We just run the container, and that's it. So here now, what you need to do, just select the source. So you can select from Git. For example, you can select a Git repo to fetch the test files, and then Testkube is going to run the image with the test files, and it's going to run it inside Kubernetes as a Kubernetes job. So for the purpose of the demo, I'm just going to upload a file, or actually I'm going to just paste the test. So I have I wrote a JavaScript file here that tests an endpoint. So I just pasted the file here. This is JavaScript. This is my test. I'm going to test this endpoint here, and just check if the status code is 200. So this is a real test, right? And actually, I did a small bug to the test on purpose to make it fail half of the times. So we can see, tested pass, tested fail, so you can see exactly how it looks. So I'm just going to create a test. And now we run it. So now what's happening behind the scenes is that Testkube is orchestrating the execution of this test, right? And it's going to show us the results. So these are the K6 logs that you can see here. And then, if the test pass or fail, Testkube saves that result for you, and also allows it to extract all the metrics. So you can run it as many times as you like. You can run many of them in parallel. Should be good. You can run it from a CLI as well. So it's very flexible. The idea here of Testkube is really give you a lot of options and flexibility into just running the tests. It's made for teams that they just want to concern themselves with writing the tests, and then when it comes to the complexities of building the pipelines, making sure it's running well in Kubernetes, they don't want to spend time on that. The most important thing is to build the business, knowing what to test, and then building the tests. And then these concerns, it's not really something that the companies should be spending a lot of time on. So it's very important to use tools like this. So we have our tests here. Let me show you. I have a different environment here where I have test suites. So I can show you exactly how you can create test suites. So test suites is basically when you go to more complex workflows. So as you become to scale and your tests become more complex, you actually end up having to chain many, like basically build test workflows, right, for your testing process, where you have certain tests that are dependencies of each other. So let's say my infra cloud test suite. That's an example. So here, let me just add. So here I already created a few tests before. And so, for example, let's say I have a Cypress test. I can add it here. You can add then, let's say, key 6. So after this runs, you can run this one. And if you want, you can run them in parallel. You can add this. And then you can add, more tests. And then if you want, you can add a delay. You can say, well, wait, 1000 milliseconds, I think. Yeah, it's milliseconds. And then run another test. So, the capabilities, it's super powerful. I think, not sure if my environment is correct. But yeah, so that's basically the definition of the test suite. I think I put maybe an error on this delay. Doesn't matter. I don't need to say. So let me just show you one thing that I forgot to show you, which is all of the tests here, they are CRDs. So if you go here to definition, this is a test definition. So it's a YAML. So if you know Kubernetes, all of the resources are YAMLs, right? So you go to a YAML, change the YAML, and then that reflects in the cluster. And the way Kubernetes works is that you define the desired state. So for example, if you want 2 pods running at the same time, right? You just declare that there are 2 pods, and Kubernetes is going to work to make that those 2 pods are always up. The same thing it's with Testkube. It's Kubernetes-native, and it follows the same Kubernetes principles, which is you declare exactly how do you want your test to run, right? And then Testkube is going to work to make that achievable. So if you say, I want to test, I want these contents to be fetched, I want this image to be used, I want this, before you run, I want this to be achieved, and then doing that. After that, if you want to say, after this happens, a webhook message should be sent to my Slack. So you can declare all of that in a declarative way, and Testkube is going to do all of that. As an example, a very common use case is that you have the tests running. For example, they fail, right? And then you get a Slack message. So that's a really, nice way for you to be aware of everything that's happening on the cluster. So so this is like a way that you can, integrate and deploy Testkube into your cluster. Testkube is very easy to deploy. You just copy a command, and then Testkube will deploy into your cluster. I think that's it. I think I covered the main things. It's super powerful for companies that they have a Kubernetes cluster, they have an application, and now they have to try to figure out, how do I test this? Like, what should I do? Like, I don't know exactly. I don't know how to set up the pipelines. I don't know, how do I give my team access to the test results? How do they see them? How do they see the logs? You have to solve all of those problems, right? So with a tool like Testkube, you can really simplify all of this and just have a central place for all of your testing needs.
That's brilliant demo, Bruno. I think, one of the things that I really liked in the demo was the drag and drop test that you showed, where I could run multiple tests at different time using using that graph. I think that was really insightful. And as they say, webinars are made interesting only when there are demos. And I think the moment you had the demo in place, we had a couple of people coming up with questions. So I'm going to flash in the first question on screen. And this is from Stephen. And this question is for Bruno, who is asking that I saw an AI analysis button somewhere on that screen. I think Stephen has a very good eye for detail. So Bruno, tell us, what does that AI analysis button do?
Oh, that's a very good question. Let me try. So we have a feature that we integrate. Actually, let me show it. Maybe it's better just to show it. 1 second. Let me just create a test really quick. My Q6 test. I think I'll share my screen again, and then I'll show it. I'm not sure if you can add me.
Sure. You can probably reshare your screen. I think I'll get it here.
Okay.
Yep.
So I'm just going to create again the test. The AI part is really, Testkube tries to help people debug their tests, right? So when they fail, what we do is we give the test info to ChatGPT, and then we let ChatGPT tell exactly what could be the issue. So in the example of this one, you see here, those are the test logs of Q6 execution. And then you can see here, like, it's failed. Then you click AI test insights. So here, right now, Testkube just used ChatGPT to make this assessment, right? And then it's going to tell you that the test failed because the test code is not returning expected, 200. If you look at the logs, you're going to see the same thing, right? But for example, you can save time. If you click here, you have AI tool just tells you what is the issue, and then it tells you suggestions. So for example, you might need to change the URL, or like it's going to just suggest you things that might help you fix the issue. So that's why we have here AI Insights, is just to help people try to debug things.
Wow, that's something good. I mean, as QAs or as developers, there's definitely some assistance that we are getting on how to fix or figure out what actually went wrong. We do have time constraint, but then I think there are a couple of questions that Greg has asked. I'm again flashing one of them on screen, which I find to be interesting. So Greg asked, how does a single Testkube instance handle multiple and or ephemeral environments, or is it an anti-pattern for Testkube?
That's a great question. So the multi-cluster functionality and ephemeral environments is part of the commercial offering of Testkube. So I can put them both side by side. So you see here, this is our Testkube Pro, and this is Testkube open source. One is based on top of the other. As you can see, they are very similar. You can barely see the difference. But one of the biggest differences is the multi-cluster part. So here are many clusters. So I'm going to just I can list them and change to them. So you can really connect and orchestrate from a single control plane all of your clusters. And then you can, from a command line, you can say, I want to run this test on this environment, run this other on the other cluster. So that's the really part of the architecture of Testkube to allow people to do that.
Great. Thanks, Greg, for that question, and thanks, Bruno, for patiently answering those. I think one of the places or one of the ideas that is coming to my head, which I probably would try at some point in time, would be probably trying to integrate Testkube as an offering as part of a software or service catalog, as which could be a part of an platform that that someone is building. So when Testkube becomes part of the catalog, I see that it will become really easier for developers and testers alike to work with multiple tools, work with multiple environments, and then eventually have the whole Testop culture in place, which is streamlined and resilient as well. So yeah, to sum it up, I think first of all, thanks to Bruno and Vishal for giving their time to this. And quickly, if I have to sum things up, firstly we did touch upon the quality aspect, and we told that it's not just about adopting the latest tools, but it's more than just a sprint; it's a marathon. We also spoke about how Testops is relationship between DevOps and testing, and how we need to focus on nurturing that and ensuring that it is something which is long term. And lastly, we saw a wonderful demo of Testkube, and definitely it looks like a framework that can be a part of some platform, where it can help your entire team get on board. So as we conclude the webinar today, I once again thank Bruno and Vishal for sharing their expertise and insights into the world of platform engineering, the challenges associated with that. So I request all of you to go ahead and give Testkube a try and see what it does, how it works. We did take in questions, and thank you so much again for joining in for the webinar. Don't forget to download our platform engineering reference architecture ebook. The QR code is here for you to download, and that will help you get a better understanding into how to start building platforms. Do stay connected with us. As I mentioned earlier, we would be coming up with a lot more webinars in the future. And if you found the webinar to be helpful, insightful, or if you have any suggestions, please feel free to drop them to us. We would definitely work on them. And I look forward to seeing all of you in the next webinar. Happy testing, and may your platform be resilient, reliable, and truly quality focused. So thank you once again for joining in, and have a wonderful day.